My name is Meg Ford, and I'm the Director of School Partnerships at Character Lab. We are so excited to see you here at this year's convening. We look forward to convening all year, planning sessions and workshops to bring together our school partners from across the country. I would love to know where people are joining us from today, so if you haven't done so yet, please type your city and state in the chat box to the right so we can see where you are all logging in from. Also, during the presentation today, feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions you have about logistics or concerns about our schedule today. So, today you will learn about your role in school-based research, discover methods for applying scientific insights to your school context, and build community with other Character Lab school partners. Exclusive to school partners on our network, convening programming will help you prepare to facilitate research during the coming school year. Tomorrow, you'll attend Educator Summit, which is hosted in tandem with Relay Graduate School of Education. This annual event, open to the public, features expert speakers and workshops to give educators the knowledge and skills they need to help all students develop character. As you're all aware, this year's convening looks a lot different than we'd originally planned. While we're gathered virtually to talk about scientific insights to help kids thrive, we want to recognize the impact of current events, both COVID-19 and the incidence of racial violence across the country, on your ability to participate today. We want to keep in mind as we facilitate sessions that many of us may be struggling. We may have kids at home demanding our attention. We may have trouble navigating new technologies. We may have connectivity issues. We may have loved ones who are ill. We may be dealing with grief. We may be frustrated or distracted by headlines we've seen or news from our communities. And we may be uncertain about how the school year ahead will look. As you participate in group sessions or breakout activities, please know that we are being cognizant of these possibilities and ask you to do the same for others. Please be generous if anyone seems distracted or stressed. I appreciate you all being here today in spite of those things and committing your time to your development so you can support your students the best you can this coming year. So now on to some logistics for the day. There is an email and phone number at the bottom of this page. You can email or call those at any point today if you are having trouble accessing the sessions. Please do your best to arrive on time for your scheduled breakout sessions later today. There are a few other norms we would like to set for those breakout sessions now. We'll ask that if you are on camera as much as possible during breakout sessions and to fully participate as much as you are able. We understand that some distractions, like having children at home with you, may be inevitable, but please try to focus as much as you can. Please avoid online distractions also, like checking emails or notifications while in session. Please pause or mute notifications during your breakouts and mute your microphone when you're not speaking. We all know that not muting yourself during a large Zoom call is the new reply all. It happens, but we'll try to avoid it if possible. Every breakout session you'll attend will have a designated tech support. The tech support staff will be introduced at the beginning of each session, so if you need help, please use the chat function in Zoom to report an issue. Tech support will message you directly to resolve it. So we'll begin today to discuss the purpose of convening and introduce Character Lab's mission and work. Then Angela Duckworth will introduce you to a researcher and student representative from our CLIP program who will discuss the importance of student voice in the research process. We will gather in smaller groups for 2 breakout sessions tailored to your needs based on your role and have a lunch break in between. After those sessions, we will come back together as a community for closing remarks by Sean Talamas. Finally, we'll close out the day with an opportunity for you to choose your own activity and wind down. Optional sessions include beginners yoga, beginners drawing, Quizzo, which is Philly, our hometown's version of pub trivia, and beginners cardio and strength. If you have not yet RSVP'd for one of those, it's not too late. You can message the email at the bottom of this page. Next, our CEO, Angela Duckworth, and Executive Director, Sean Talamas, are going to speak to set the purpose for our day today. As an introduction, we're going to show you a brief video. Please enjoy.
There are no people on the planet who have better intuitions about kids and what makes them tick than classroom teachers. And that is one reason why the Character Lab Research Network is really built around amazing classroom teachers who work in partnership with scientists. Put the intuitions of amazing teachers together with the insights of scientists who specialize in one facet of a child's development. And I think you get something magical. You get something that neither the educators nor the scientists would be able to do on their own.
School partners partner with Character Lab to work with world-class scientists across the country who are experts in their domain and are trying to co-design activities with these school partners. And they also get professional development opportunities throughout the year to think about how to operationalize these insights and use them every day.
I think character development is so important because if you learn about these character skills while also learning about your academics in school, I think that the combination of the two really complement each other.
How do we get the greatest scientists in the world to work on the well-being of kids? Make it easier, make it faster, and I think that is really what drives Research Network, the idea that if you really want the greatest scientists in the world to help kids thrive, you make it fast and you make it frictionless. And ultimately, because you have student voice and teacher voice through the whole process, you make it fruitful because you are, from go, thinking about what schools and kids really need.
A lot of times research is very theoretical. Yes, if we could cherry pick our students and design our school and had a budget that was unlimited, then we could probably make those theories work. But Character Lab, coming in, meeting with the students, seeing what the school is, what the day-to-day is, and tailoring their research to our need benefits us as well as them.
You will receive preliminary results and publications. You will see what works, and we're also going to share with you what doesn't work, because we think that's just as important.
Character Lab made it pretty seamless. They integrated it into what our school district already does. It was easy.
I think the kids feel somewhat important about this, that they're involved in the process.
It really helps everybody, and it gives students a voice, which I feel like we really need, because not everybody asks our opinions on things.
You're here because you and your school have said that you want to contribute to the science. You want to be on the cutting edge.
The purpose is not necessarily to implement a program. What we're doing right now is really just looking at basic research. So we're on the cutting edge, we're on the front end of what this research is and building something that's going to be good for schools, but more so importantly, good for students.
A big part of the things that schools and teachers know that we need to be focusing in on is this sort of holistic development of kids. Character Lab really prioritizes teacher voice by giving us so many different opportunities to bring that individual school culture into the fold of the work. And the reason that it is so important to get these sorts of things into schools is because students need it. Teachers need to know how to deliver it. It's bigger sometimes than just about a test score or an individual report card. It's about the development of our students.
Everyone. I am thrilled to be here with you. Here for me is Philadelphia. It is 97 degrees outside and very humid, which is very Philadelphia for the summer. I wanted to share with you just a little bit of the story of Character Lab, and that means sharing a little bit of my story. So I grew up in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is exit 4 off the Turnpike, not far from where I am right now. And I went to public schools. I became a teacher after graduating college. Actually did a few things, but maybe the most important and meaningful of those was I taught math in high schools in New York City, in San Francisco. I taught in Philadelphia as well. And then I became a psychological scientist. I became a researcher. I was drawn to psychology because I thought, oh my gosh, every teacher is a psychologist. But I thought about my own teaching and I thought, I know there are ways to unlock motivation and potential and wonderfulness in my students. I myself felt as a teacher not as great at that as I wanted to be. So I became a psychologist to kind of understand what makes students tick. When are they happy? When are they at their best? Could I add some psychological science to these enduring questions and maybe help other people who are in the classroom do what they want to do better? When I was just finishing my PhD, I met two veteran educators. Their names were Dave and Dominic. And they were on a quest to figure out what psychological science was being done that would be most relevant to helping their students thrive. And we together created Character Lab, the nonprofit that you are in the family of starting today. And I want to just say, as a bridge to Sean's remarks, Sean is our fearless and wonderful executive director, that basic question still motivates everything that we do. The idea that we know in our hearts, every single one of us, that kids have enormous potential. And many of us, as educators, feel like that potential to thrive is not being met, that there are ways in which we can support them so that they do better academically, so that they thrive in ways that are social and emotional and physical as well. And so in a way, I want to say, in bridging to Sean's comments, that Character Lab itself is a bridge between the world of K-12 education and the world of psychological science. And I'm so very happy that you have joined us as bridge builders. Sean, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Angela. And thank you all for being here today. While the format is a little different than it's been in the past, we're really excited about today's sessions. Character Lab's mission is to advance scientific insights that help kids thrive. Through the Research Network, we connect scientists with educators so that the research is relevant to your students and your context. Some of you attended this convening a couple years ago when we were only about 20 schools and a handful of scientists. Today, we're partnering with over 100 schools and over 60 world-class scientists from across the country. Research Network makes school-based research fast, frictionless, and fruitful. The legal, logistical, and technological infrastructure we've built together accelerates the rate of innovation in schools. But more science faster isn't our only goal. A critical component of Research Network is promoting student and teacher voice into the scientific process so that all studies running on Research Network reflect the needs and interests of your students. In one of the breakout sessions today, you will have the opportunity to tell us what's most important to your school community so that we can match those interests and needs with the right research. We know how important data can be to inform the work you do with your students through continuous improvement cycles. That's why we put so much time into thinking about the character and well-being survey snapshots. These snapshots, as many of you know, are quick views of your students' self-reported data 3 times a year, so you can learn about your students' character and well-being at different points in the school year and take action based on that evidence. In one of the breakout sessions today, you'll hear about the improvements we've made to snapshots based on your feedback. In the wake of COVID-19 and the calls for racial justice, our work together is critical. Resources promoting social emotional learning and well-being are going to be crucial as you face these uncertain times. We've been preparing for the fall by ensuring that students can participate in research studies, whether they are participating in classroom or remotely from their homes. In our next session, Dr. Sophie Chukas-Bradley, a scientist on Research Network and professor at University of Delaware, will talk about her research with Chrissy Canoe, a student representative from our CLIP program. For those of you unfamiliar with our CLIP program, it is a year-round program for high school students attending one of the schools on our Research Network. CLIPsters are student representatives who give feedback on research activities so that scientific insights are relevant to their school communities. And for the participation, CLIPsters are provided a grant award. We are so excited to have them join us today. You'll likely see them in some of your sessions. I'm now going to pass it back to Angela so that she can tell you more about this next segment.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, this part I have to take, my notes out because I don't want to, this is a big responsibility and I don't want to mess it up. I am delighted and honored to introduce Chrissy Canoe and Dr. Sophie Chukas-Bradley. I'll begin with Chrissy just as background. She is a student in our CLIP program. She's a rising senior at Padua Academy in Wilmington, Delaware. Outside of school hours, she's a member of the broadcast team, as well as president of the Black Student Union and a member of Blue Gold, a club that works with the Special Olympics. Chrissy is interested in criminal justice and I had to say I did a little cartwheel when I learned this, psychology in college. That's obviously the most interesting of all subjects one could major in, Chrissy. We're so honored to have you here, and I'm so delighted that you'll be here in dialogue with a world-class researcher, and that is Dr. Sophie Chukas-Bradley. She is a researcher, as Sean mentioned, on our network, also an assistant professor at the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences, the University of Delaware, and director of the Teen and Young Adult Lab there. She's run numerous studies in schools as part of our research network, and her main areas of study are gender, social media use, and body image, especially as these relate to mental health and well-being. We're so excited to have Dr. Sophie Chukas-Bradley and Chrissy Canoe here, in part because this, to me, is what we mean by putting student voice back into the conversation on how students thrive. I'll leave it to you guys.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Chrissy Canoe. Good morning, Sophie. How are you?
Good morning, Chrissy. I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Okay, so just to start things off, what is your area of study?
So Angela just gave a lovely introduction. I study psychological and interpersonal development, broadly speaking, during adolescence, roughly ages 11 to 22. I'm especially interested in adolescent social media use, how teens use social media and how it affects their well-being and mental health. And particularly, I'm interested in the role of gender in social media use. How do girls and boys use social media differently? And does it affect well-being and mental health differently, especially with regard to body image? And I won't be focusing on this today, but outside of my work with Character Lab, I also focus on sexuality, romantic relationships, and LGBTQ youth mental health.
So as Angela said, I'm actually really interested in psychology. So I was just wondering what brought you to this work.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you're interested in it. So like you, I've been interested in psychology and specifically the psychology of adolescence since I myself was a teen. And one of the things that's always fascinated me the most about this period of life is that it's a time when, first of all, other than infancy, it's the time when there's the most rapid and profound development. So psychologically, biologically, socially, we see such huge change during this period of life. And as I imagine, you know, being a teen right now and other Clipsters are experiencing, and as adults know who are with us today working with teens, this is a time in life when there's so much room for growth and excitement. It can be a wonderful period of life. And it's also a time with lots of challenges. And Angela was highlighting those in the video at the beginning. This is a time when we do see increases in mental health symptoms. And there are a lot of challenges that are specific to this developmental period. One example of what makes it a challenging period of life is that biologically and psychologically, teens are programmed to want to be more independent, to want to spend more time with peers, to spend less time with parents, and to make their own independent choices, and sometimes to take more risks. That's actually evolutionarily something adolescents are programmed to want to do. And yet most adolescents in the US today are living under the rules of adults, both in school and at home. So that's an example of something that's unique to this period and might help explain why we see such a rise in mental health symptoms. So Chrissy, you're living this time of your life right now, and I'm curious whether this is ringing true for you, especially during this time of COVID-19.
No, yeah. So you mentioned like the adolescent drive to be more independent and to be with peers. And like from personal experience, I can say that like, especially now during this time, it's harder to fill those desires because one, being safe, and then also parent rule also overtakes every time. So it can definitely take a toll psychologically because you can't always do what you want to do, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are some of the things I'm really interested in studying in my work with Character Lab. So when I was starting to become interested in psychology, like I said, when I was just a teen myself, and then in college and in grad school, I knew I was interested in the psychology of adolescence, but I didn't always know that I wanted to be a researcher. For a while, my goal was to be a therapist and an educator, and I am those things as well. But I didn't really understand what research was, and I'll get more into that in a bit. But for now, I'll say that along the way, as I was trying to figure out what kind of psychologist I wanted to be, like Angela, I realized that what I most wanted to do, what I was most passionate about, and where I felt I could make some impact was as a psychological scientist. And once I had an understanding of how research could actually have an impact on teens' lives, I came to appreciate its unique ability to ask questions and address questions in a systematic way. And I'll get into more details a little bit later today.
Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, why is school-based research so important?
Yeah, school-based research is extremely important. And I feel like to get into why school-based research is important, I first have to say, why is research important and worthwhile in general? And then I have a lot to say about school-based work and the work of Character Lab in particular. So originally, as I mentioned, I wanted to be a therapist and I wanted to work directly with teens. I really didn't know until college what research even meant, let alone why it was important. And Chrissy, I'm super curious, before you became a Clipster, did you know what research was? And has your understanding of what it is changed over time?
So before Character Lab, I was like aware of the basic definition of research, I guess, but I never really understood why it was important at all, or why in the middle of class we would have to take these different surveys and like what it was for, because we never had that explained to us. But now that I'm a part of it, I'm aware that like, even though it seems so small and minuscule, like it's contributing to a much bigger environment and it's having more of an impact.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what's so interesting about research and what I really want to comment on today in this fireside chat, because in the moment-to-moment, day-to-day aspects of participating in research, it can often seem like it's maybe a waste of time or there's no clear purpose. And I really want to comment on why I decided to spend my life being a researcher and why I do think it's valuable and important in ways that might not be fully recognized or understood, especially if you're a teen being asked to do this in the classroom without it having kind of a bigger picture involved. So while I was figuring out what career path I wanted to take, I started thinking about how, first of all, there is so much we can learn from individual conversations with teens. So in my work as an educator, educating college students and mentoring students in my lab, there's so much I can learn about the experiences of teens and young adults. And, you know, teachers and educators with us here today, you know so much about what's happening for teens right now. And what research allows us to do is take some of those insights when we have a true partnership, as we do with Character Lab, take the insights of teens themselves and take the insights of educators, and then ask questions to large groups of teens in a more systematic way using scientific methods so that we can better understand beyond individual experiences, which are so incredibly important, we can understand broader experiences more systematically. And I know for many educators, it can feel like being asked to do these surveys and experiments is taking away from valuable classroom time. And as an educator, I really appreciate the value of classroom time, and it is limited. And it might seem like, what's the point? What are we learning from this? And how could it be more important than traditional education? And a little bit later, I'm going to give some examples of the very specific real world questions we're addressing through the research in the Character Lab that I've been able to do in my lab with everyone's help. And it's really important to note that school-based work has been going on for a long time, but as we heard in the intro today, Character Lab is making this work so much more efficient and so much more directly applicable. And when I was a graduate student at the University of North Carolina, I was doing school-based work on my own. So what this meant is I would travel to schools myself and meet with superintendents, principals, and teachers to understand the needs of a particular school and school district. Then my research team and I would go into classrooms and explain the purpose of the study to students and see who wanted to participate. And then we would go in for days at a time, weeks, and sometimes years to actually administer the studies. So I really do have an appreciation for just how much work is involved. And I'm so, so grateful to be part of this partnership where many of you here today are the people on the ground doing that super hard work. I have a lot more to say about this, but I'll pause, Chrissy, to see if you have any questions and then say a little bit more about the value of school-based work specifically.
Yeah, so I was just wondering what one of your like most recent Character Lab studies was and what's really exciting about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you an example of one of my recent studies, and then I'll come back to talking about why do we need to do this study in a school as opposed to, say, in my lab at the University of Delaware. So in one of my most recent studies, I worked with Brian Galla, and he is a professor of education at the University of Pittsburgh. And Brian and I were really interested in understanding, given the work that he and I had done with Character Lab and more broadly, showing that while teens get so many benefits from social media, they also experience a lot of struggles with social media. So social media can allow kids to connect with their peers. During COVID is a great example of how teens can't see their peers in person necessarily, but can still connect via social media, and that's super important. And social media can provide a lot of opportunities for social comparisons. And in my work on body image, I think a lot about comparisons with these really curated, idealized, edited, photoshopped images. And I've shown in my work over time that that can have really negative implications for body image and mental health, especially for girls. And teens themselves tell us they get more positive than negative things out of social media, but they wish they could control their social media use a bit. And feel free to jump in anytime. If you have any examples from your life or peers' experiences, feel free to interrupt. So teens say that while they get benefits, they want to cut back on social media use, and they often have not been successful in doing so. And in about half of US schools right now, schools are using these interventions that I'll call traditional educational interventions. So these are interventions that focus on long-term consequences of social media use. So for example, these interventions will teach kids about how if they eliminated social media use, they'd get better sleep and they'd protect their privacy and they'd be more likely to one day get a job as an adult. And I'm curious, have you had any intervention like that in your school?
Not like directly, no.
Okay. Does this type of intervention ring a bell for things like drug abuse education, just the long-term consequences are highlighted?
Yes.
So that's the traditional approach. The problem with that traditional approach is that teens aren't necessarily motivated by long-term consequences. What they care about a lot is independence and the ability to make one's own choices, and teens care a lot about social justice. And so Brian and I were eager to see if with the Character Lab, we could develop an intervention that would not focus on long-term consequences of social media use, but would instead teach adolescents about how tech companies are intentionally manipulating them to spend more time on social media. And so our goal was to align the desire to use social media less and to use it more intentionally with things teens care about. Teens really don't want to be manipulated by adults or by big companies, especially making profits off of them. No one does, but teens especially care about that. And so we developed this intervention where we focused, again, not on the long-term consequences, but on providing information about things like how tech companies have figured out how to make social media more like slot machines, where we're really motivated to keep checking and to keep refreshing our apps, because like with a slot machine, it might be that the next time we check, we'll get something really good. And that's called variable rewards. Does this ring true to your experience?
Yeah, because it's not even expecting to get something good. Sometimes we're just sitting there and there's no other option of what to do. And that's just easily accessible. So we just keep refreshing. Maybe something exciting will come up.
That's such an important point. Yeah, boredom is a big motivator too. We really think that, and we have now evidence for this that I'll get to in a moment, but in designing the intervention, we really felt like for teens, will it really be motivating when you're bored or when you want some excitement of some form to be thinking about, well, if I use this app, maybe I'm sacrificing my privacy and one day I won't be able to get a job. Probably not. That kind of long-term idea is not really relevant in the moment. So we provided these more applicable and we hoped kind of emotionally activating examples of things like tech companies saying they intentionally made their products feel more addictive and they won't let their own kids use social media. And we developed this intervention. We got feedback from Clipsters and school staff. And then we rolled out the intervention with Character Lab as an experiment. And we compared its effectiveness with a traditional educational intervention like the ones that are being used in schools across the country. And Character Lab allowed us to test this intervention with over 1,000 kids. And I cannot overstate how rare that is to be able to reach that many students. I've never been able to do that in my independent school-based work, and certainly not in my work where people have to come to my lab at the University of Delaware, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. So our exciting finding is that our intervention was effective in motivating adolescents to use social media less, and it was more effective than the traditional intervention that's more like what's being used in half of schools. So we were really excited by the findings, and while the findings are preliminary, we are really hopeful that with further testing, this is an example of how school-based research can lead to the development of interventions that actually have an impact for teens. And I'll pause in a moment to see if you have any thoughts about this. No pressure, but I know I'm talking at you a lot. But I also wanted to share that one thing we found more specifically is that the intervention was more effective for girls. And in my work with the Character Lab more broadly, I've been doing work that shows my longitudinal work where I follow kids over time, shows that girls and boys use social media differently. And one thing that's really different is girls are more focused on physical appearance concerns and body image. And girls who are especially fixated on how they look to a social media audience, those girls are more likely to develop depressive symptoms over time. And that's one example of work I'm doing right now with Character Lab. And we're also in the fall going to bring in questions that are specifically about COVID, such that we can see, while kids are using social media more during COVID, what are the effects on kids' well-being? How does that affect character development? How does that affect mental health? How does that affect educational outcomes? So I'll pause here and see if you have any questions. And I also want to be sure to comment on what this would look like if we tried to do this study in a lab instead of in schools.
Yeah, so I want to touch back on that in a second. But like, apart from this ongoing study, have you or even in this study, have you used any extra feedback from staff and students to inform your research?
Absolutely. So one example, I'll give a different example of a study just to give you and people listening a sense of the whole broad range of different methods we use in Character Lab research. So in another study that's led by my graduate student, Annie Mayhew, she's been really interested in understanding gender disparities in STEM-related outcomes. So this is something that's been studied a lot across the US by many different research teams. And I imagine many people listening know a lot about this gender disparity where young women are less likely than young men to pursue STEM-related fields, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And Annie developed this theory about how maybe part of what's going on is because girls are socialized to focus so much on physical appearance. And that's something I could talk about for hours. That's a big part of the research I do. But for decades, it's been demonstrated that girls are socialized to focus more on physical appearance and are judged as people more broadly based on how they look. And Annie wondered whether there might be some stereotypes teens hold, and maybe adults as well, but we're starting with teens through our Character Lab work, about how maybe there's a connection between math and science and unattractiveness. Does the idea of becoming someone focused on math or becoming a scientist not fit with these messages girls receive about the importance of physical appearance and the value of careers that are more focused on appearance? For example, right now, surveys suggest that many adolescent girls, their number one career goal is to be a social media influencer. And that's a career that's really focused on appearance and status. So we developed these questions about stereotypes kids hold. And we also developed this implicit measure where we show different faces with and without makeup and see how quickly teens can pair those faces with words related to math versus other types of careers. And in the interest of time, I won't dive into all the results. And that study was actually interrupted by COVID, so the results are not complete. But with regard to the feedback that teens and school staff provided was so important for that study, because we were given the feedback that basically in asking whether kids had ever heard of specific stereotypes, it sounded like we were endorsing those stereotypes. Yeah. And that was not something that we wanted to do, of course. So that's an example of how it's super important to get feedback and students' own words and reactions before we roll out a study with 1,000 kids. So yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, like you just said, like just hearing it even once can like sometimes stick with people for so long. Like this is like just hearing something like, oh, pretty people can't do math. You know what I mean? So then even though maybe somebody has said that as a joke, it can like stick with somebody and then they're like, well, that's why I can't do math. So it's fine that I can, it's acceptable. And then they stay in this like fixed mindset and don't work to improve and just assume that, oh, well, that's okay. I can just do something like social media influencing, which there's nothing wrong with that. But they just feel that if they can't do this thing, there's no reason to work towards it.
Yeah, so that's what's so challenging about research is figuring out how can we ask questions to really understand thoughts and beliefs people do hold without introducing them. And one really important thing is that research has shown over time that asking questions about specific beliefs. So this is outside of my work in the Character Lab, but I also do work on adolescent suicide. And research has shown asking people whether they've thought about suicide does not increase the likelihood of attempting suicide. And asking people sensitive questions about body image or about disordered eating does not increase the chances of having negative body image or engaging in disordered eating. So there is a lot of evidence that it's important to ask questions directly, and it's unlikely to increase the risk that people will then hold new beliefs. And yet we had to be very careful to add language to our instructions that made it clear that these were ideas people may or may not have heard, and to make it clear that we were not endorsing them ourselves for the reasons that you're discussing that are really important. Yeah.
All right. So I just wanted to ask you if like you had any ideas on what some of the best ways to maintain a stable mental health.
Yeah, this is really important. So we know that teens have been struggling with mental health concerns more in recent years. And that was clear even before COVID-19 and before this era where there are a lot of other nationwide and global changes happening beyond the scope of what we can do justice to right now. But this is a time of racial awakening for many people in the US and attention to racial injustice. And we need to understand what the effects are for teens' mental health of everything that's happening in the US and globally today, and the effects of a time when people are predominantly inside and not able to access things that we know help with mental health, such as direct face-to-face interpersonal connection. We need research, and I'll be doing some of this research with Character Lab to understand the effects. But I can tell you some of the things we know from pre-COVID and some recommendations from experts about what teens can do to improve mental health right now. And it's all about balance. So first of all, it sounds so trite and annoying, I know, for an adult to say this, but sleep is one of the most important things. And one of the risks with social media use is that teens are exposed to blue light until late into the night, and then are sometimes checking their phones in the middle of the night. And we know from extensive research that having good quality sleep versus poor sleep hygiene is one of the biggest predictors of mental health and well-being. We also know that interpersonal support from both adults and peers one's own age is incredibly important. And with social media use, it's important for teens to figure out how to get those needs met without all the bad stuff that comes with social media. So, for example, video chat, what we're doing right now, is a way of actually socially connecting and getting social support. Whereas research from my lab and work with Character Lab and many other researchers has shown that just passively scrolling through social media feeds, especially if there's social comparison involved, that doesn't help improve mental health at all. It actually introduces mental health risks. So it's really important for teens to be figuring out within whatever context they're living in at this time when they're not going to school in most cases and can't see friends in person in many cases, how to have interpersonal connection with people in one's home if possible, if teens are living with parents, caregivers, siblings, or other people, and to use video-based social media and social media that is closest to in-person interactions to get social support. And it's also really important to find a balance between talking about things that are upsetting. There's a lot to process right now with what's going on in the US, and having time that is focused on mindfulness, which you might have heard about, across social media right now. But there are enormous mental health effects that have been shown through studies. So figuring out how to disconnect from a lot of negative news and information and avoiding being overloaded by that information. And instead figuring out ways to be mindfully present in the moment and literally practicing mindfulness. So quiet breathing. And if it's possible to be safely outside, getting physical exercise, or even just going for a walk and connecting with nature. My mom is a forest therapy guide. She leads nature walks that are focused on having people connect fully with all senses with nature. And that's been shown to have mental health benefits. But if all of that feels too hokey, just disconnecting from media and having conversations with family or friends that aren't focused on negative events is an important part of balance, even at the same time as it's important to find people to talk to process the really hard things that are going on. And for teens who are really struggling, one nice thing about COVID is that there's a lot more flexibility in seeing mental health providers. Many providers who previously couldn't see people through video chat can now do so. So if teens are living in rural areas, they can get psychotherapy now if they're fortunate enough to have mental health coverage in their insurance. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that? What do you think is helpful for you or for other people you know?
I know, like, being in COVID, it's harder to like maintain some kind of structure to life. So I was just wondering if putting yourself on some kind of schedule, like waking up at a certain time every day, going to work out, eat it, you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That might help contribute to balance in any way.
Absolutely. So we don't have research on this yet for COVID specifically, and I hope to collect this data in the fall with Character Lab. But we do know that having a structure in life in general is extremely important for mental health and well-being and thriving. So the best thing people can do to get that started is what you just said, so smart, which is to get up at the same time every day. Even if you've had trouble sleeping the night before, getting up at the same time every day will help reset your sleep schedule, and set your body up to expect to go to bed and get up at consistent times. And then having a structure around when are you doing your schoolwork, if applicable? When are you spending time with family? When are you on social media? When are you going outside? That's extremely important.
All right. So I want to thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been really informative and helpful.
Thank you so much. Can I say one more thing before we end? I just realized I hadn't come back to that point about school-based work versus like lab-based. I just want to make sure to say this because I didn't know it until I became a researcher. So one of the reasons school-based research is so important is because when you do work outside of schools with teens, you can run into a lot of issues with bias. So for example, if I try to recruit kids into my lab at the University of Delaware, and you're actually in Delaware, so you're someone who lives nearby and in theory could come into the lab. But many universities are in places where it's really hard for people to get in person to a university. Yeah. And if I'm recruiting people to come in person, we have to think about bias that's introduced with things like which parents actually have transportation to get their kids to the lab. Mm-hmm. Which parents can take time off work to bring their kids to the lab? And who's even seeing ads for the study in the first place? Mm-hmm. Whereas when we're doing school-based work, we're able to have all kids in a whole school participate. And that means we're able to have samples that are diverse with regard to race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, ability status, gender, in ways that aren't possible when we're doing lab-based work. And then, as I mentioned, in school-based work, like what I used to do, where it was just my team going into schools and doing it all ourselves, we can only reach one school at a time. And the Character Lab is really a groundbreaking way of reaching so many schools and so many students and teachers all at once. And that improves diversity in psychological science, which has been a huge issue historically with our field. So I just wanted to put one more shout out and thank you to everyone who's a part of this really amazing partnership. And Chrissy, thank you so much for your time and for being such a great person to talk to about this stuff.
Thank you so much. I now want to invite Meg Foran, Character Lab's Director of School Partnerships, back to the screen to give some more reminders about the rest of the conference. Meg, welcome back.
Hi, everybody. Before I go into those reminders, I want to thank Chrissy and Sophie again for their presentation. It was so great to hear about the research that has been happening this year and hear Chrissy responding to that. It's exactly why we love having our Clipsters, who you've probably also seen in the chat. We have 80 of them participating this year, and they will be in sessions with you all and also participating throughout the week in their training. And we are so lucky to have them for exactly the reasons we were just hearing about. So we are almost ready to head into our first breakout session. To reiterate some expectations from earlier, please be generous if anyone seems distracted or stressed, or if there's a person wandering through the background of a screen. Please try to do your best to minimize distractions on your end on your computer with notifications or anything else happening on your screen. Zoom will be our primary platform for our breakout sessions that are happening for the next couple of hours. We expect all participants to be on camera during breakout sessions and to fully participate as much as you are able to do so. And do what you can to pause anything or mute your microphone when you're not speaking during those breakouts so that we can all follow along with the session leaders. In order to get to your breakout sessions, you'll return to the email you used to access this session today, and you'll have links that take you to the one that you are assigned to based on your role and your school. There is an email and phone number at the bottom of this page that you can call or email at any point today if you're having any trouble accessing anything. So if you also want to save it so you can get back to it later, feel free to do so. Please remember that some of your sessions will include students from our CLIP program, like Chrissy and the other Clipsters, who I'm sure are shouting themselves out in the chat right now. We are very lucky to have them here today, so let's do everything we can to make sure their voice is heard. It can be a little intimidating to talk to your principal or your school assistant principal or teacher at your school in a summer conference. And last, as noted before, we have choose your own activity sessions that are scheduled from 4 to 5 today. We love to have fun at Character Lab and love having joy. So we are making sure we still do that even if we are remote from each other this year. We encourage you to unwind and connect with others during this alternative happy hour by trying out activities like a beginner's drawing class, a beginner cardio strength class, yoga class, or Quizzo. Again, Philly's a little Philly for everybody. These are optional, and if you haven't signed up already, you can spend some time on the lunch break picking one out and then email convening@characterlab.org with your selections. Again, we are so thankful to have you all here today, and we are so thankful for everyone's participation from all over the country. We get so energized working with you all, and we can't wait to see you in the breakouts. We are wrapping up this part a little early, but we will start the next part exactly on time, as we love to do. So we will see you at 12:05 in the Zoom breakout rooms. Again, we're wrapping up a little early, but we'll start the next session right on time at 12:05 in your assigned Zoom rooms. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us. We're so grateful for your time and participation today and are excited about what's to come this school year. We covered a lot today. We heard from Dr. Sophie Chugas-Bradley and Chrissy about the importance of student voice in the research process. What an amazing fireside chat. I truly left inspired about the important work we're all pushing together. We also talked about ways to use a character and well-being snapshots to help students thrive in your school community. And we collected information on the needs of your unique school communities to help us facilitate research that's most relevant to your individual context. I was particularly impressed by how much everyone was using the chat features and really enjoyed seeing schools and districts from across the country take time out of their very, very, very busy days right now to focus on students' character and well-being during these crazy times. I've also just really enjoyed having students on this journey along with us. Huge shout out to all the Clipsters who engaged in these sessions and really pushed our thinking. And I leave feeling energized by what lies ahead. Our CLIP program has grown from 20 to 80 students as part of our commitment to promoting student voice into the research process. Our character and well-being survey will continue to evolve to support your needs. And we're excited to kick off another year facilitating research that will contribute to kids thriving everywhere. Most importantly, I look forward to continuing to learn from you all. It's been your participation and feedback that's allowed us to improve and continue this work. So related to that, this evening, you'll receive a survey about convening in your email. Please take time to fill this out so we can continuously improve. So for those of you who have been to convening in the past, you know that we like to mix in some fun where we can. A couple of years ago, we were in a bowling alley. Last year, we were on a boat. And this year, well, we did the best we could. So while we're virtual this year, we are offering Choose Your Own Activity today at 4 p.m. Eastern, so in about 30 minutes or so. And these are optional, but the Character Lab team will definitely be there. The options are beginners drawing, beginners cardio and strength, beginners yoga, or Quizzo, Philly's version of pub trivia. And if you haven't signed up, please email convening@characterlab.org with your selection within the next 15 minutes. And finally, tomorrow is Educator Summit 2020, and we can't wait to see you there. We have some great programming planned. Please check your email for the links to access this conference. Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you all for everything you do.